62 entrants, 14 different manufacturers, and in the end, Ferrari wins again. Welcome back to Motorsport 101. Forza Ferrari indeed, and I'm going to get this right off the top in right away. Back-to-back Le Mans overall prediction winner Dre Harrison back at it for episode 525 of Motorsport 101. Forza Ferrari. Ladies, gentlemen, and friends outside the binary, we love you. Oh, man, I can't believe I got it twice in a row. I'm still finding it wild that I was even able to do that. Anyway, let me do a podcast for a second here. Hi guys, I'm glad you could join us for this Le Mans review special. I also want to say I'm very, very glad and very surprised and honoured that a certain co-host of mine, Mr. RJ O'Connell, has woken up at 3 a.m. in the middle of a hotel room in Japan to do a podcast. I'm very grateful for his presence right now. And it was there at Le Mans himself. Like, RJ, how are you, first of all? And then how was Le Mans for you?
The only drawback to Le Mans weekend is that I was the walking plague for a lot of the week leading up to the race and even going into the race. I seem to have gotten over the worst of it now, but none of that dampens my enthusiasm for the fact that I was there for what was. I'm trying to generally think, because this was a memorable race. I think it was a good race. Was it better than the one we had last year? It's a tough call. I'm still thinking about it in my mind. Like, was last year's better or this one better? I don't want to spend too much time waffling about it, but overall, like, I had a blast. I got to do different things this weekend that I hadn't done before, like go out and walk the track, walk the pit lane some. That was all like super duper cool. United Autosports gave us and the entire DSC team guest passes, so we got cool. pretty nice arrangements, better than anything I'd ever expected out of this. And the event itself was entertaining and a whole lot less stress-free. And I got to meet a bunch of wonderful people that I knew were going to this event, even if it was just for a short time.
Yeah, I did see that. Shout out to many of the friends of our show: Danny Brennan, partner Anna, Elizabeth Blackstock, Josh Wilcock, Mr. Giacomelli himself. Saw many cool friends of the show down there together. And shout out to our own, the best college football writer in America, Spencer Hall, who I saw you had a selfie with. And look, I friggin' love Spencer Hall's work. He's cool as shit. So really cool. I was very jealous of that selfie, I must say.
Yeah, thank you so much. He enjoyed it. I think everybody enjoyed their time there. Well, they maybe didn't enjoy, like, if you were me, like walking to the car at 11 to go get your regimented 2.5 hours of sleep and then walk back in what felt at the west end of the circuit like a light drizzle, walking back in. They've just thrown the race under a safety car, and I'm thinking, well, if they run this under rain for a bit, this will give me time to catch up. And then pretty much the next 5 hours where the other half of the team were asleep were just like, damn, this is so easy. Nothing is happening.
just watching dudes just do pace laps around a safety car because it was just too wet to race.
The record for the longest single safety car intervention due to weather and the longest amount of total safety cars in a single Le Mans. Not one of the longer races, but one that was still very fun.
I think it was something like nearly 7 hours of safety car in total during this one, which is just wild. Again, but weather's the weather. I spoke to Cam about this at the time. Sadly, he's not here this week. He said to me, like, easily most rain-affected Le Mans since probably 2008, which certainly tracks from what I remember. But we will break down and make the most of the next hour or so, the 24 hours of Le Mans, the 90-second run-in of the 24 hours of Le Mans, and one of the closest finishes we've ever had at Le Mans. Just 14 seconds after 24 hours of racing between the number 50 Ferrari 499 that took the overall victory, Miguel Molina, and Nicklas Nielsen as well, and in that leading car alongside the fight with the number 7 of Jose Maria Lopez standing in for Mike Conway, Kamui Kobayashi, and Nyck the Vries, and we'll talk about how it all came to a head down the stretch in that one. We gotta sadly talk about the stewarding because we can never go too far away from that on Motorsport 101 because there was some controversial calls or non-calls down the stretch that also probably needs to be talked about. And then we'll also break down all of the hypercar performances, some of the drive performances in there as well, and some passing thoughts on LMP2 because a certain class winner has had, well, some news drop in the last 36 hours.
He's had a couple weeks, hasn't he?
Just a touch.
Yeah, BJ Garg is just like really racking it up.
I can't. The last month of Nolan Siegel has to be an emotional roller coaster, unlike anything most people ever have to go through. More on that as we get into the next hour or so. But basically, you can find us. We're on YouTube.com/Motorsport101. Subscribe on there if you like to listen to your podcasts on YouTube. You can do so over there. We're on Twitter.com. He also like to call it Elon Musk failed business investments at Motorsport_101. If you want to find our personal handles, you can at Dre Harrison 101 and at RJ O'Connell, C Buckley 917 if you want to follow Cam. I did some thoughts on the race myself on the website as well, motorsport101.com/blog, as well as a little post on Nolan Siegel's big news if you haven't heard about it already. If you'd like to be kept in suspense, wait for another 50 minutes or so, and we'll talk about it a bit more then. And if you really like us, you can back us financially on Patreon, where you can read that post early as well. Patreon.com/motorsport101. If you just subscribe at any level, you'll get some early access to some written stuff from me every once in a while. $5 gets you early access to all of our content, including the audio episodes we do as well. $10 gets you in the supporters club of our Discord server where you can listen to these episodes live as they're being recorded. You can also follow us on Instagram as well, Motorsport101pod, and pretty much where all good podcasts are available. We're in a bunch of new places as well, thanks to our new provider, Audio Boom. You may have noticed a bit of disruption last week. We've switched over suppliers in the meantime. SoundCloud it served us very well, but it was just limited as an overall platform. And I've done enough work now professionally to know where the place to be is, and it's Audio Boom right now. So there is a whole heap of new places you can listen to Motorsport 101 if you're that way inclined, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Castbox, Deezer, iHeart, Listen Notes, Player FM, Podcast Addict. All of those places also now have Motorsport 101. So if you haven't listened to us on there already, now you can. So you haven't got an excuse now. Go listen in. Much appreciated. Right, without further ado, let's get into the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It was a chaotic Le Mans, one of the most heavily rain-affected races in recent times. A lengthy rain delay in the early hours, leading to 7 total hours of safety car running, the most out of Le Mans since 2008. But in the end, with more rain in the final 2 hours, it was the number 50 Ferrari that triumphed, with Nicklas Nielsen bringing home the final stint with 2 13-lap runs at the end of the race. We'll tell you why that's significant in a minute, to beat the number 7 Toyota of Jose Maria Lopez, Kamui Kobayashi, and Nyck the Vries to win by just 14 seconds, with the Toyotas chasing the Ferrari down at the end, with the Ferrari on a power save cycle to get to the end. One of the closest Le Mans finishes ever, really. We'll do the overall breakdown first, RJ, before we go into a little bit more nitty-gritty on individual manufacturers and drivers and whatnot. But the overall vibes on this race, I mean, for me, it very much felt like a tale of two races. First half was bonkers with the amount of hypercar passing and fights through the field that we saw. And then, in the end, the cream kind of rose to the top, and it was the two best teams in hypercar that duked it out right at the end.
Yeah. To reinforce the quality of this race, did you know that in the first 91 editions of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and granted, the way the race has been run, fundamentally, the way the race has been driven has fundamentally changed in recent years. You cannot afford to just soft pedal it for 24 hours. You have to hit it hard from the get-go. We also have, if you didn't notice, one of the deepest premier class fields we've had in this race in a long, long time, 23 cars. That contributed to the fact that up until this point, no more than 2 cars had finished on the overall lead lap. In this race, we had 9 cars that finished on the overall lead lap. Both Toyotas, both Ferraris, 2 of the 3 Porsche Penske Motorsport cars. Can you tell I hitched my bracket to the wrong horse? One of the Cadillacs and both Hertz Team Jota cars, which is kind of a miracle in itself.
Number 12, Callum Ilot's car wrecking himself in night practice, having to be rebuilt in basically 24 hours. Incredible job by the Jota Sport team and mechanics to put that together. That's normally a 3-week job. They did it in about just over 24 hours. Unbelievable.
When the opportunity to run well, score WEC championship points, finish Le Mans, maybe even win Le Mans, although it didn't happen this time, when that opportunity is there, you're going to make it at that pace. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked for a bit. It became clear, very evident, that the 50 car was going to be a factor after neither factory Ferrari was really itself during qualifying, where they really, really bossed it. But Nicklas Nielsen went on a tear early on. He and one of the other Ferraris, though not the one you might be thinking, it's the yellow private label car that was really giving that car the biggest run for its money. I think some of the side by side, in particular between Antonio Fuoco and his fellow Ferrari Driver Academy alum Robert Schwartzman, was some of the best racing of the weekend. Shout out as well to Kamui Kobayashi trying to make it 3 wide around the outside of the boat in Indianapolis.
He's a madman.
Absolute. You expect nothing less from Kamui Kobayashi, and that's why we all love him. Mm-hmm. This race took so many interesting twists and turns. There was a point where a well-timed full course yellow or slow zone put the race in the number 6 Porsche's favor. And then we got a safety car that immediately erased that advantage. As the race went on in the final hours, it became clear Ferrari was going to be a factor. But then we get down to the last 2 hours. It starts to rain. Number 50's door is open and they have to come into the pits. And at that time, I'm just thinking, right, they're hosed, because every hypercar was consistently doing 12 laps. 13 was possible, but you really had to be pushing it. And at that stage, with 50 minutes to go, when the number 50 made its last pit stop, I didn't think they were going to make it. I thought maybe 13 laps is going to be stretching it. There's no way they make 14. And one of the graphics brought up the numbers that said they had 3 laps completed and 11 laps to go. 3 plus 11 is 14. The math was not mathing. I guess I underestimated how much the wet conditions and a slowdown for a coincidentally broken down Ferrari at the side of the road, a GT car, would have helped their case, but it was so marginal at the end. And Nielsen is the driver out of all these guys that doesn't have any sort of relevant single-seater experience. When he came up through karting, he was a one-make guy. He ran Audi TT Sport Cup. He ran Ferrari Challenge. Then he went into GT cars, and he's done so impressive that he's been really one of the standout drivers within this Ferrari hypercar team. And that's in a car with Antonio Fuoco, who some publications have said was the out-and-out best pure driver in the hypercar class last year. And Miguel Molina, who, let's not forget, has been driving Ferrari GT cars professionally for about 7 years now. And before that, he was in DTM and its Super Silhouette Golden Age. But Nielsen really, really stood out to me in this race. This was a moment that really cemented his place. And of course, he joins a very long list of Danish drivers who've won the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which started back in 1989 with John Nielsen, and then continued with drivers such as Tom Christensen, and Tom Christensen.
It's a long list. And I must admit, as I'm going to give myself another small humble brag here, so please forgive me, listeners, but with an hour 40 to go when Nielsen made that stop, I was the first person in our Discord call to point out. An hour 40 to go when he came in, I was like, Sash, could they make it on one more stop? And Sasha Wagenblast, a good friend of the show and an every episode listener, I said to Sash, could they do back-to-back 13-lap stints to make the end? And he said, probably one too many, Dre. And I was like, all right, fair enough. And then that's exactly what they ended up doing. I think you're right. I think the wet weather combined with the slow zone, I think just made life just about easy enough for Ferrari to win it on back-to-back 13-lap stints to survive to the end. I mean, don't get me wrong. They got a little bit of help. Jose Maria Lopez on that chase down at the end of the race had an unfortunate spin at the Dunlop Bridge. That Dunlop Bridge had been wreaking havoc all week. Cars spinning, going wide, understeering off all week long, practice, qualifying, you name it. And that spin cost Lopez 12 seconds in a race that Toyota lost by 14. It would have been a really interesting finish, as if a 14-second win at Le Mans isn't already interesting enough, if Lopez never had that spin. But yeah, and like Nicklas Nielsen, take nothing away from Nicklas Nielsen, the man with the lightest foot at Le Mans. I don't know how he was able to get out under his own car without limping because of how light his foot was to be able to pull off an energy save of 2% of usable energy left to win it the way that he did. Literally, there was no margin for error on that save, and he got it absolutely spot on.
And I think we need to be fair to Jose Maria Lopez, who was drafted in short notice when Mike Conway had that unfortunate cycling accident. You know, wet, rainy conditions, slipped and fell off the bike. It sucks, but it happens. Jose Maria Lopez, a man who always during this time paired with Conway and Kobayashi in years past, always kind of felt like the odd man out, always felt like the man who threw it away. And while it's kind of easy to just like distill it down into like, I don't know, he was very, very impressive during the race, particularly during the hours of the race when we hadn't quite gotten all that rain just yet. But when it was after the big rain delay in the race, he was, according to our friends at the B Pillar, the fastest man on the track from hour 18 and a half to the end of hour 22, aka the point in which we had just resumed the race, but we had not had that rain shower at the end. Yeah. He did about as well as he could do. And I also want to say, man, I am gutted deep down for Toyota because this could have been the greatest comeback in Le Mans history. When you think about all that number 7 crew went through. First of all,
stacking it in qualifying.
Kobayashi then stacked it in qualifying. Then midday Saturday during the warm-up, Nyck de Vries can't avoid one of the Acadis ASP Lexus checking up in front of him, and then that just crunches the nose of the car. And it looked like that was going to be a problem early in the race when de Vries was just making no progress, when Sebastian Buemi in the 8 car was just tearing through the field. But slowly but surely, and then eventually once the race resumed after the long rain delay, they were back in it. And even then, they still had to overcome obstacles. Kobayashi and Lopez reported 2 slow punctures. Right after the restart, Nyck de Vries had oil just coating his windshield, and he couldn't see, and that made him take an unscheduled pit stop. Kobayashi and Lopez also reported momentary losses of turbocharger value, which to any hardened Toyota supporter that has been around at least since 2016, you immediately start hearing Fortunate Son in your head. And yet, even through all of that, in the last couple hours of the race, they were Toyota's number 1 challenger to take the win for 23rd overall, which would have been a record for the lowest starting position from an overall winner of the race's history. It just wasn't to be. It's a combination of factors. Yes, Lopez made some mistakes late rain, but I think overall he done his part to help give his team a fighting chance. And I'll throw my hands up and admit I was not prepared for that level of driving from Nielsen to pull off that fuel save.
Me neither. We associate the 50 with the speed dudes, especially with Antonio Fuoco, who might be the fastest man in hypercar outright, especially over a single lap. I think that's what we more associate the 50 crew with since Ferraris formed themselves in WEC. And yeah, I didn't think Nielsen had that in him. Don't get me wrong, he had a fair bit of margin to play with. Maybe a bit more than we would have thought given what happened with Lopez at the end, but even still, you can't take anything away from how great that save was at the end. Just superb work all around. But there is some controversy we do need to address here, because that finish didn't have about it. A race director and our friend and yours, Mr. Comedian Eduardo Freitas, came under fire for 3 calls/no calls in the final 2 hours. We mentioned a potential unsafe release in the pits wasn't called against the number 50 when they nearly hit their lollipop man and with an LMP2 right outside the fast lane. Alessandro Pierguidi in the 51 Ferrari spun out Brendan Hartley when the rain started to come down and was only given a 5-second time penalty for doing so. And the big one, it took 7 laps for race direction to finally call Nicklas Nielsen in for the number 50's passenger door being broken and not being able to close properly, and was forced into the stop to obviously get that fixed and addressed. Did he get it wrong down the stretch, RJ? How did you feel about it?
So a note about the 51 and the 50 penalty. These are the decisions of the stewards and not the race director. It has to be said. Jean-Francois Varro, Chiefs Chairman Steward, Yves Baclain, Rui Marquez, Michael Schrager, Tim Mayer, and Chris Jeffrey. They were the ones ultimately responsible for handing down those and any of those other penalties. I guess there was frustration in the the timing towards the end of how those decisions were made. And I can't really speak to that.
They were over an hour to get those, and that was a consistent pattern for a lot of this race, where the big incidents that for driving standards, the consistent theme was over an hour before we got a call.
Yeah, with stuff like earlier in the race when Robert Kubica and Dries Vanthoor trying to clear traffic, and Kubica just moves over and burnout revenge takedowns Vanthoor in the wall. Thankfully, Dries Vanthoor is okay. In a case like that, where you have a safety car that comes out to intervene, they're not handing down a penalty until after that safety car is clean, because why would you allow somebody to come in and surf that 30-second stop-go under the safety car and basically turn into no penalty at all? The way the race was playing out, I was thinking at the time, the number 50, the 50 getting the no call for the unsafe release was going to be a non-factor anyway, because of the way that them having to come in to close the door was just it was throwing them off sequence, and I didn't think they would win at the time. Obviously, that changed. The 51 cleaning out the 8, I expected better from Alessandro Pierguidi, who was generally fine most of the other race, but
he was, that was clumsy.
Very, very clumsy, and that obviously ruined the challenge for the number 8 car, which at the time was Toyota's top challenger for the win. And boy, would that have been vindication for them after all the shit from last year to go in and win the race this time out. But unfortunately, due to that driving, it wasn't to be. Although I will say I did watch that chase down of Lopez on Pierguidi and yes, they did lean on each other, but kind of me was thinking, without even really noticing how the race was playing out, do you think they just send Lopez out there to go get some retribution in the end? It doesn't work like NASCAR, of course. This race is unlike, but that was a thought that crossed a lot of people's mind.
It did for me.
Yeah. Oh, jeez.
I've watched too much NASCAR this year. But no, I mean, I'll tell you how I feel about it. You could probably talk me into calling it a wash on the unsafe release. The number 50 never got into the fast lane. That's what the stewards report said. Fine. Yep. I can just about get there. I still think it was unsafe. I mean, you almost ran over your lollipop person. I still think that's dangerous, so to speak. But fair enough. If the 50 never got into the fast lane, then fine. Pierguidi's spin, I felt like that was more than 5 seconds, but again, you took the wet conditions as a mitigating circumstance. Fine. I can see the vision. I'm not hugely against that. I can see it. Fine.
And also it didn't seem like it was clumsy, but it wasn't that terribly egregious. It just it would. What do we say all the time? Where you have to like punish the action and not the outcome.
It's true, because if you punched off the outcome, you'd be much more harsh, because that cost Brendan Hartley 40 seconds to recover that car.
That cost the number 80 for the race.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no question they were in the mix, and they were out of it after that spin. In a vacuum, it's clumsy. I wouldn't say it's malicious. Yes, the wet weather probably has played a small role in that, given it was the worst down the bottom of the track at the Mulsanne. So, okay. You could probably talk me into just being the minimum penalty of 5 seconds. Fine. I cannot forgive them taking half an hour to call Nielsen in for the broken door. And the reason why I can't forgive them for that is because this happened at Spa. The last time we had a WEC round, the 6 hours of Spa, and Neil Yarny's Proton had the exact same problem. And it's like the race directors were giving them every chance to fix that door on their own. And I just don't like that vibe. It's for me, it's needlessly dangerous.
You know what's crazy during this race is that the Proton Porsche, which was sadly a non-factor throughout the road race, had another door problem that cropped up during the early stages of this race, and that was the first part of their race going completely downhill.
Yeah, the point I'm getting at here is that the series had a chance to learn from what happened in Spa and could have and I think they were slow to react to Yarny's car at Spa, and they had a chance to address that with this and I think respond more promptly. We had it at 7 laps from when we first spotted the broken door to race direction finally meatballing them and Freitas getting on the radio saying, if you can't fix this door, you're coming in. And for me, that's unacceptable, because at that point, Nielsen is a danger to himself and his fellow competitor by having a vulnerability on that number 50. It's Freitas himself said it on the radio call. It's a safety concern. That's not something you should dilly-dally about or ask them to fix on the road. That's asking for trouble, in my opinion, especially in such a busy race, a very dangerous race with a huge amount of underlying risk, wet conditions, car going slower than normal. For me, it feels like that was a very, very late call. And unfortunately, by pure coincidence, the timing of being called in for that meatball was what opened up the possibility of a 13-13 finish for that Ferrari. So you can make an argument it did have an impact on this race and an impact on the finish, because it opened the door for Ferrari to try that strategy to win it. And that is, to me, frustrating.
I don't know what happened there, and like coincidentally enough, you know who is on relief duty as race director here for G2 World Challenge Asia at Fuji, which is where I'm at, by the way. I'm at G2 World Challenge Asia at Fuji this weekend. Eduardo Freitas is standing in. Maybe I can ask him what was going with that. Maybe not. Obviously, he's got a job to do, but it's sketchy. Absolutely. I think the way that all timed out, I was just thinking like, yeah, that them going off sequence that much pretty much cost them the race. And as it turns out, it did not, the way things stretched out. But I don't want to be like one of those people. And I know like some of it is joking around and not like sincere, but man, it definitely feels like we have entered the F1ification or the footballification of hypercar era, where people are just going on about Ferrari international assistance. Like, yeah, some of those calls were sketch, but at the end of the day, this was still the best car in the race that had the least amount of trouble on the way to the victory.
Probably. That is absolutely true. That is definitely true. I think the right car in the end ultimately won. I think they were consistently fastest car with the least amount of trouble and perseverance. I think ultimately ended up being the number 50 Ferrari. I think the right car ultimately won this race. I just don't like the way that the race was managed that got us to that point, if that makes sense.
You know what? That's fair.
And I find it disappointing because I don't want to take any credit off anybody's victory or taint something that's so special, but I have to be critical and say, if you pull that Ferrari in one lap earlier, they can't go 14-13 to win that race. They have to take an extra stop.
Then again, if you pull them in right away the first time you notice the issue, like, who knows? Maybe all of this strategy is entirely different, and they still end up back on top anyway.
It's true. It's true. I can't deny that possibility. But people will point this out. The way it shook out was, it's like that time the guy on The Price is Right guesses his showcase on the nose, and Drew Carey is like, I'm not going to celebrate this because there's no way this is ever getting out. Until it did. True story, by the way. It's one of those things that it's too big an impact to ignore. But it's unfair, and I openly admit, yes, it is unfair to plaster the Ferrari with that, but it's too big an impact for me to also turn a blind eye to it, if that makes sense.
I mean, you had people all last year saying that Ferrari were gifted a win because of the way they changed the way that balance of performance was administered leading up to Le Mans, going into Le Mans, and I didn't believe that for a second. Like, ultimately, there are factors such as tire warmers that helped them out, especially at that time. And this year, they didn't have tire warmers, and they solved the problem of getting the tires up to temperature, which is very valuable in a race that was as cold and as wet as it was back then. And even this year, like, you hear the chatter about Hypercar shouldn't be a BOP formula. I get that we miss LMP1 hybrid, and I get that in an ideal world we wouldn't need balance of performance, but ultimately it's there. It's the reason why we have so many top class competitors, and the entertainment itself is fine. And I didn't felt like that cheated me out of what should have been a good result. I mean, giving away some of our manufacturer breakdown early, Peugeot got the biggest buff in terms of balance of performance. If you watch that race without that context, would you have even been able to tell?
No, not a hope. They were dreadful.
Yeah.
We'll get to them in a minute.
We jump right into the manufacturer breakdown.
Yeah, let's go manufacturer by manufacturer and break this down. First of all, Ferrari. Well, brilliant. You won, and you got two cars on the podium. Alessandro Pierguidi holding off Lawrence Vanthoor by just over a second over the line in the end. So a double podium finish for Ferrari, let alone the win. A 1-3 in the end. And hey, the yellow 83 AF Corsa could have easily factored into this as well if it wasn't. Yeah. Privateer in inverted commas. The 83 Ferrari for AF Corsa would have been right in the mix as well if it wasn't for two big problems. One, Robert Kubica sideswiping Dries Vanthoor into oblivion, as we mentioned earlier. That led to a 30-second stop-and-go penalty, and rightly so. And BMW were livid about that.
Not as livid as Dries, and I think with time they've had a chance to talk it out and cool down, but Dries was not happy about it, and
he was pissed.
I don't blame him. He got shaken up. He got a pretty hard hit, and the 15 car was looking like that was going to be the one BMW that had a hope of a relevant result, particularly as the race played out. But we never got to see that car after the rain delay.
And even after that, after Kubica took his penalty, the hybrid system failed in a yellow puff of smoke, so much so that Yiffy Yi, who was celebrating his birthday on the second day of that race, had to take the old hypercar, jump out of the car because it was unsafe to touch. Never a good sign. A smoky mess for one Ferrari, but hey, a 1-3 for the other. You take those. I still find it hilarious that Ferrari have only won 2 races since coming back to hypercar and Premier Class competition, and they've only won both Le Mans. Funny that.
Well, it's kind of like the old Indy 500 versus IndyCar Series conundrum. Would you rather win the championship, but not win the biggest race of the season, as Toyota did last year? Or would you rather go and not win any of the other races, but go and win Le Mans back-to-back years for Ferrari's 11th overall victory at Le Mans, which puts them, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, 2 away from Audi for second on the all-time list.
Which is wild, given Audi's reign of terror in the 2000s and early 2010s.
Given that this Ferrari run is like segmented with like a 50-year gap.
Yeah, as you do. Look, by all accounts, you want to win the big one where you can. And yeah, that's what Ferrari's done here, and they've done it brilliantly. Again, their car is fast as hell. They were the biggest sufferers of the Powergate BOP restriction they put in. They lost 1.7% of their power beyond 250 kmh. And it didn't matter. They were still easily the most comfortable car in a straight line when it came to passing people down the Mulsanne. Ferrari was making that look easy all the way through. It just did not matter at all. Just a brilliant car, and driven very, very well by the people around it. Like, shout out to Yiffy, who was phenomenal in that 83 Ferrari, by the way. Really, really impressive stuff all around for me.
Before the collision, Kubica had been like brilliant otherwise. And I think Robert Schwartzman, like, if you had your doubts about like him as a single-seater driver, whether it was the way that he couldn't manage his tires or any other mitigating factor, he looked like he belonged at this level the way that he drove in this race. It would have been really fun to see this car mixing up in the last few hours, but ultimately that hybrid system failure it was unlucky, and it just happened to be them that got struck down. I also remember, like, during the race, Graham Goodwin, who was one of the World Feed commentators on the English side, messaged our entire DSC team group chat to say 51 took new slicks while it was coming down on Saturday night. Madness. So even in this race that Ferrari won, the Ferrari F1 bozo gene was not entirely far from it.
But that's just it. The rain was so segmented in different places across the race that sometimes trying to keep the heat in the slick tire was the faster way to go compared to putting the wets on. And
why did they take new slicks?
I don't know. Ferrari still have a degree of haunts in them that will never truly go away. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And that's probably part of the fun. Toyota, so close yet so far. The number 8 was in contention down the stretch until that spin. The 7 almost came back and pulled off a 20 place plus comeback in the end.
23rd to 1st, it would have been.
Shout out to Brendan Hartley, who was the outright fastest man, and it wasn't particularly close either across the course of this race. Brendan Hartley was ridiculous in this race, in that number 8 car. Absolutely insanely fast.
For the first 6 hours, he was the fastest man on track by 1.7 seconds. This is according to the numbers from B-Pillar. And even a late stages race, like 3rd fastest from 1850 to 22, getting down late in that race. He's still like particularly quick, even after the unfortunate getting cleaned out by Alessandro Pierguidi, which, we've talked about it. I just would have thought it would have been neat for Toyota to put all the nonsense about beating nobody, Mickey Mouse trophies, yada, yada, yada. And
win a real ring.
They did everything in their absolute power to ensure that they would win that race. And coming in the last hour, they were the odds-on favorite. You cannot prepare for what the 50 did on strategy. And I've talked about it before, like, Lopez did his part. He was a bit sketchy under pressure in the last hour, but these things happen sometimes. Who knows what it would have been like for the number 8 Toyota. But I will say this fundamentally, this is not the same team that in 2015 and 2017 found new and innovative ways to just not win this race. They have all the ingredients, and they're a lot happier with the way the race played out, because I think last year they were hacked off, even though they were still in contention with both of their cars for much of the race.
End.
One of them all the way into the end, and it wasn't even like a loss of power sort of thing took them out last year. This year, I think they were fine, and if you believe Akio Toyoda, recently renewed chairman, despite, the stuffiness of the rest of the board saying, oh, you're spending too much time here racing. So what, man? It's making you more fun and enjoyable. Toyota said that a new car may be coming next year, and that may just be what they need to get over the top, because the GR010 has had some upgrades over the years, but it is the oldest design on the grid. And maybe it's time for a change for them. Maybe that's what they need to get back on top of this race. And I feel confident that they will again.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be so critical of a team that's won 5 out of the last 7. Even so, it's people are gonna have their whispers. Given we've just had back-to-back defeats to Ferrari. I don't buy into this, win a real ring bullshit either. You can only beat who they put in front of you at the end of the day, and Toyota was here to compete.
Yeah, Toyota, it's not Toyota's fault that VW and Audi cheated diesel emissions and made Audi and Porsche pull out at the end.
Yeah, that's not their fault, and they shouldn't be adjudicated so harshly for it. Porsche, I think they had a very good package. I really do. I get the impression that their misjudgment of the conditions is what ultimately did them in so many times, because so many times they hung their cars out to dry on the wrong compounds.
Yeah, it's interesting. And of course, they'll take this result anytime over last year's unmitigated disaster.
And it's still a good result for the championship for them as well.
Definitely.
A good points day, as Cam Buckley would say. I know he'd say that if he was here.
Yeah, Kevin Estre, Andre Lauderer, and Lawrence Vantour finished just off the podium in 4th and still get to leave with the Hypercar Drivers' Championship lead. What's crazy is I went back through my notes. I write all my notes on hand like a boomer. This was at the point where Nasser in the 4 car, RIP my pick. I pitched my horse to the wrong team because and it's not without good reason, because they have good drivers. It just, the 4 car was never there all weekend, it seemed, compared to the 5 and 6. I don't know what's up with that. So it is what it is. I made my pick before first practice 1 had even started. So I did not have any feeling just you wait, they're going to come back later in the week. No, yeah. But I found it back in the race about 6.5 hours to go. Nasser slides off and crashes in Indianapolis and brings out a slow zone. And just before that slow zone, the 6 came into the pits, and it left with a 20-second advantage over the number 8 Toyota. So at that time, it was their race to lose. And then Daniel Fuminelli's Heart of Racing Aston Martin flips. Again, RIP my pick.
It's a shame.
Completely annuls the 6's advantage. And while they were still good, again, much better showing than last year, just didn't quite have it at the end compared to Ferrari and Toyota.
No, definitely not. And Lawrence Vantour, that man was nice. He put in some work in that number 6 car.
7 hours, which makes me think, even if Andre Lauderer isn't the guy that he was 10 years ago, why did they only give him 3 hours? And furthermore, why didn't you give Kevin more drive time? Kevin Estre was the man who put on Hyperpole.
Estre was great. I don't understand why Estre didn't get more seat time. I really don't.
We say this, of course, 8 hours is not a large amount of seat time. I don't know, but fun fact, Lawrence Vantour has driven the most cumulative time over the last 2 24 hours Le Mans in the Hypercar class.
And he's him. He's an Iron Man. He really is for Porsche. What a driver.
Good. He's the one master you cannot slander.
No, I can't say shit about him and his brother. Like, Vries and Lawrence Vantol were sensational in this race in their respective cars. Really, really, going to be pillar right at the top of the timing sheets most of the way through. The Vantols were mad impressive. Cadillac, I think with the amount of rain that they had and their car being rear-wheel drive as opposed to four-wheel drive, which is all their other competitors run, I suspect that ultimately did them in with the amount of rain that they had. It didn't help they were lacking top speed either. They were struggling to pass people throughout the race because of just that lack of top end. Well, it was a rough one on paper. The 311 binned it, and that was Pipo Derani.
The Action Express, the Action Express car was pretty much nowhere all weekend, and then Pipo Derani crashed. How could Jack Aitken do this? The 3 car died Sunday morning, and then died with oil just leaking out of its engine. Insert General Motors reliability joke here. And it left just the 2 car, which was running basically off sequence with the rest of the lead pack for several hours. Yeah. So they would pit sit laps, and then the rest of them would come in and sit laps. It was staggered just like that during the race. And you thought at the end, as these strategies converge, the 2 cars in with a shot at the podium, and it just wasn't to be because they were just cooking their wet tires in the last couple hours.
Yeah, just too much heat. If it was a dry race, I'd have given them a much more of a shot, because it's just when it's in the rain, you need 4-wheel drive. You just do. There's no getting around. It's just to dissipate that energy. I will say this though, on the number 2 car, Alex Palou really, really is him. This. His first ever Le Mans, only second time ever in the car. Degree of difficulty off the charts given the conditions. As fast as Earl Bamber, sometimes quicker than Earl Bamber, who we all know is a phenomenal hypercar driver. Alex Palou was running shoulder to shoulder with every Cadillac not named Sebastien Bourdais. That is sensational. If there was any more proof needed that Alex Palou is not one of the best drivers on the planet today, then I can't help you. Sensational.
And we won't get to see him next year unless IndyCar changes the date of the Gateway race. Man. Let's talk about French disappointment. Actually, I want to jump the queue. Is it better to be Peugeot, who finished the race with both cars but were never seriously competitive at any stage of the week, or would you rather be Alpine, who gave you a glimmer of hope that at least the car is quick enough to be competitive, and then neither car makes it to the stroke of midnight on Saturday?
I'd rather be Alpine, because at least Alpine gave me enough hope to say at least your car ain't slow.
The Orca spine is a good foundation to build that car on. It's not slow, but of course, with 2 suspected engine issue failures, the thing about internet cynicism without merit is that sometimes the cynics are right. In this case, I don't. Alpine, the endurance team, has a lot of work to do to get this car up to the standard where it can complete a 24-hour race. It's completed 6, 8, sometimes 10, but 24 is a different ballgame. And you arguably did not come out here just to say, well, we finished all the other WEC races and just leave Le Mans where it may. You're Alpine. You revealed this car last year. You were the home manufacturer that is, in a sense, part owned by the state of France.
Yeah, you are literally the national team. You are literally the national team. You've been bailed out by this government before already. Your base of manufacturing is just down the road. This was meant to be the Alpine homecoming, and they got mecha-chromed. You were really hoping it wasn't going to be a mecha-chrome. The jokes write themselves. Anyone who's an F2 fan knows the jokes. We've all been there. We all know what the score is. And unfortunately, the prophecy came true. There was a double mecha-chroming. which is brutal because the Alpine was clearly quick. It was right up there with the top contenders.
I did not want this outcome to befall the Alpine team because, again, I thought it would have been the funniest thing if they did go the distance and they did embarrass Peugeot. And for the first hours of the race, they were beating them. And I guess I have to think about it this two ways, Peugeot, because like they've had mitigated disasters before. They finished the race with both cars. They didn't do that last year. But you have also introduced a new car that is meant to be a more complete package. You have abandoned the wingless design in favor of something more conventional. You got the biggest BOP buff in the field. You have the drivers, but they still don't understand the car enough to make it go quick around here. I don't know what's up. And I don't believe we're not going to pull. This is not the Peugeot that's going to pull out with like boots on the ground and testing like they did in 2012. The entire governance of the company is different. And also like they do see like a better return on investment of their efforts, winning or otherwise. I don't think they're just going to go out and decide we're going to pull the plug at the end of the season because they're not winning. But with that track record in mind, I understand why people would think that they might. And they still have a lot of work to do to understand what's going to make this car competitive.
I hope they're not heading for the exit door. I know people always get concerned about things like that. It's not a good sign that this upgraded car is arguably worse than the last one. I mean, at least last year they could show that they were great in the rain, and they had their own little moment in the sun, ironically. By doing that, they've put a wang on it, and to quote Jimmy Broadbent, and it's just not working. The biggest BOP break in the field, and they were slow. They were massively uncompetitive. Let's be real here. This was a 3.5 hour race by the time the safety car shook out, and they still finished 2 laps down. That's just not going to happen for Peugeot. That's just not good, no matter which way you slice it.
It would be good on a lot of days for a lot of manufacturers in the history of this event. But the way the standard is, again, 9 cars finished on the lead lap. We're starting to get to the point where it's just like if you're 2 laps down, that's not good enough, which is crazy. BMW showed me more in this race than I think the combined efforts of their WEC and IMSA programs had shown in the past. But they were just unlucky. Robin Friends hit too much of the curb in the art car, and that smashed up the car that would later retire. Okay, it wouldn't retire, but it would spend most of the racing garage and would go back to take out the checkered flag. Obviously not being classified, but hey, they got the car fits to run the checkered flag. Like, that's cool. 15 car, just unlucky. Marco Whitman had a spin earlier in the race, but I really think they could have bounced back from that. And Dries got crunched in the wall.
Car's quick, though.
It's quick.
It's something. The car's fast. That helps.
One thing that concerns me is that Andrew Kissinger, who used to work for the BMW Hypercar team over in IMSA, pointed out that like this M Hybrid V8 does not have a very good traction control system, and I think that contributes to something Cam pointed out in Daytona, is that this thing makes shapes when it tries to make corners. It makes geometrical shapes, and it's likely hard to drive at the limit for that reason. So I think another software revision and whatever other Joker upgrades you can make the car, I certainly think it wouldn't hurt. But there's something there. There's definitely something there that we haven't seen before, and that just makes me. It's unfortunate that at least the 15 car didn't make it to the finish. Lamborghini, the result was roughly the same as Peugeot's, but we're all happier for them. And I think the reason why is because this is their first Le Mans. The SC63 has had a tough time getting out the door to begin with. It was not easy when both cars went out in separate incidents on cold tires and on Sunday morning and spun around, but it was a pretty decent result. Fun fact, this is the first time that a Lamborghini car has ever made the checkered flag at Le Mans.
Look, They got a top 10 finish on debut. They were largely clean. They didn't have any big technical problems. That's about as much as you could have reasonably asked for, I think. This was a great race for Lamborghini. I mean, I know it won't look like it on the timing sheet, and it won't look great on paper, but this is the first real heavy-duty test of this car, and it succeeded. It made the flag with no major difficulties. That's great. You've got a reliable car. That's a good foundation to build upon for the future.
When everybody thinks of Lamborghini, they think of bulletproof reliability, obviously.
Of course.
And hey, this was the same thing that happened at Sebring. Weren't expected to contend on pace, but you just survive and good things will come our way. Now, while we're talking about Italian manufacturers, it's time to give Asana Fraschini the respect they deserve among the recent privateers of Le Mans, because they finished. They cleared a bar that Colin Cole's respective efforts over the last 15 years, since 2009, have never been able to do. They simply finished the race. It wasn't entirely clean. Yes, Antonio Saravalli and Carl Bennett are still project drivers that you're bringing on more for commercial reasons than out-and-out talent at this stage in their careers. And yes, the number 11 car did get tapped by the number 4 Porsche, and that was pretty much the only real issue that they had, but they made it to the finish.
Right. But the drug horse driving lineup wasn't ideal. Didn't help that they were nudged off by Earl Bamber in the night, which, cost them a bit of time in the pits. But they were clean. They kept their noses dry. They didn't get into any trouble, and the car was reliable, and they ended up 14th overall. That's a good day's work. That's a really good day's work. Like you said, it pisses on every privateer we've had in recent times.
I wouldn't say it's as last year. Glickenhaus brought their cars home to the flag 6th and 7th ahead of the Porsches. As much as we have given Jim shit over the years, that's a high watermark, and that's a high watermark that they've always been mashed up against. And to me, I just think they can't worry about that. They've just got to be as good as they can be at this point in time.
Yeah, it's something. It's a big step in the right direction to know your car is reliable and it works. That is something that needs to be pointed out. And an excellent effort from the Isotta Francini team all around to make the flag, and again to do it without any real dramas. Again, that takes some doing. That in itself is an achievement, and that's not to be condescending. It's a genuine achievement to just finish this race, and they did it with flying colours. So well done them. Really good effort.
Absolutely. Of course, there were other classes at Le Mans that competed. The first LMGT3 winner is Manti Racing EMA's Yasser Shaheen, Morris Schuring, and Richard Leitz. Richard Leitz, who became the new Ironman of this race with 18 consecutive starts, now has his 5th GT class win at Le Mans, stretched out over 3 decades and 2 in the last 3. Also very cool for Yasser Shaheen, a Australian businessman of Palestinian origin, to stand on the top step of the podium. And the troubling thing about the GT3 class in this race is that I was genuinely curious to see how it would have played out if the AM driver's time wasn't just burned up under the safety car. Which is strange, because even after that, the 92 car, the Manti car, which I thought was going to be the car that should win the race on paper because Alex Malikin is so cracked compared to the other drivers in his class, they were still the top dog in the race, and then gear selection issue takes them completely out of contention. But Trey, I want to know how heartbroken you are that Valentino Rossi didn't have a chance to stand on the podium in his debut race through no fault of his own. And to be fair, Rossi was quite good Saturday night.
He was good. No, look. Petty beefs notwithstanding, Valentino Rossi held up his end of the deal. Okay? I'm not going to dunk on someone for the sake of it. Not even I'm that cruel.
Yeah.
Mostly. But no, it's a shame that the 46 car was running. They were leading for good chunks of that first half of the run in the 46 BMW, but just one unfortunate mistake coming off the Dunlop Bridge, in the gravel, car wrecked, game over after.
And that's from Ahmad El Harti, another driver who, like Malikin, is a driver you consider to be one of the best bronzes in that category, relatively young and as quick as some out-and-out professionals. Really uncharacteristic mistake for him to make. Also very cool that Iron Dames got to see the flag in fifth, considering like their race could have ended like early on. And hey, nobody gave them a hope in hell of making the checker flag, but Proton Competition's 2 Ford Mustangs finished 3rd and 4th. That's outstanding.
Great effort. The fix stand, as we called it in the middle of the Discord call.
The new Big Chungus of Le Mans.
The new Big Chungus, the Arsepacker 3000 podium finish on debut. Love to see it. Well done, Proton.
And of course, there was another prototype class at Le Mans, which was won by the hospitable United Autosports, Oliver Jarvis, Bejoy Garg, and Nolan Siegel. 2 American rookies take to the top step of the podium Le Mans debut. Ollie Jarvis' second LMP2 class win. Remember, his first was back in 2017 when a Jota-run Jackie Chan DC racing car almost won overall. Remember that? It was good for Bejoy Garg, who's had his trouble like stepping up from LMP3 to LMP2, even though he does have a talented boy. Dre, what a last few weeks it's been for Nolan Siegel. He goes from getting bumped out of the Indy 500, but not because he lifted, to standing on the top step of the podium in LMP2 at Le Mans.
What a month he's had. What a literal month he's had. We haven't even mentioned the 3rd chapter of this story yet.
And and this is where I bite my tongue because it's 4 a.m. in this Japanese hotel room and I don't want to get a disturbance.
Do you want me to take this one?
Go ahead.
Okay, for those who have missed the news that came out about 36 hours ago at time of recording, Nolan Siegel was announced to be taking the number 6 car for McLaren for the rest of the... this is an immediate hire for McLaren for the number 6 car for the rest of the IndyCar season, replacing Théo Pourchaire, including this weekend at Laguna Seca. His home race, ironically speaking. I mean, don't get me wrong, and I need to stress this. Nolan Siegel is a great driver and a very promising talent who deserves his flowers. He is a 5-star prospect. He is a fantastic prospect. 19 years of age. He will only get better. Théo Pourchaire was a 6-star prospect. This sucks. This is nothing against Siegel, who I would have happily pulled to get an IndyCar seat for next season with somebody. But it should not have come at Théo Pourchaire's expense. And that's what disappoints me, because this move doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. Like, I'm sorry. Like Tony Kanaan can come up with all the feel-good stories about the Indy 500 and the bumping that Siegel took that, had Kanaan put an arm around him and say, he's our guy. And Gavin Ward can say, this is about long-term stability. This is the 7th driver that's dressed in your colors in IndyCar this season. 7, if I'm including Kyle Larson. You cannot sit there and tell me that this was part of your long-term sustainability plan when the number 6 was, we didn't get Alex Palou, so we signed David Malukas instead, even though we knew he wasn't going to be ranked as an A-tier driver by General Motors. And then you cut him after 4 races to sign Théo Pourchaire, right? And no, I'm not going to call this a funding problem, because McLaren had no problem giving Pato Award $10 million in new money at the start of this year, and it's not like McLaren is lacking cash. No, we're not, and it's disrespectful to call Nolan Siegel a pay driver for that reason, just because he does have a well-off dad, okay? There is no indication, and no journo has put pen to paper officially saying that Arrow might be on the way out of McLaren. I'll wait for that story if that's actually true. But you cannot tell me that the master plan was sign Théo Pourchaire, have him have 5 really solid IndyCar starts to start his career, and then sack him openly for no good reason. You've admitted you didn't have a good reason to sack Théo Pourchaire besides replacing him for Nolan Siegel because he felt like he was a can't-miss prospect. I'm sorry. Nolan Siegel is not Théo Pourchaire. Théo Pourchaire should have been an F1 a year and a half ago, quite frankly, in my humble opinion, right? He was overlooked already by Sauber for Zhou Guanyu, and no disrespect to Zhou, but Théo Pourchaire was a brighter F2 prospect than Zhou by every measurable metric. You did not need to do this. There was no indication that Siegel was going to get snapped up by anybody else, and there was no inclination to drop Théo Pourchaire this early. I'm sorry. The reputation of Zach Brown as a guy that looks after people has been shot to flames. This is pathetic. I can't believe we're having another conversation about the number 6 car again this year just because you couldn't get Alex Palou. And don't get me wrong, Palou is somewhat accountable for this, for backing out of a contract that he signed. But this is not how you build a reputation of stability in your franchise, especially given you still haven't confirmed Alex Rossi for next year yet. What are we doing here? What are we doing here? Nolan Siegel doesn't deserve the shit he's gotten by people calling him out for being quote-unquote not good enough when he is. Théo Pourchaire absolutely did not deserve to lose his job, and he's already burned a bridge in Japan to try and move to America to try and make this work, and he's now been sacked. And David Malukas understandably was putting out petty memes in response because we all know you treated Malukas like dirt. What are we doing here, McLaren? What are we doing here? You're fucking with people's careers. It's not fair. I'm done. I think I'm done.
This is me screaming into my hat as loud as I feel comfortable at 4 a.m.
McLaren hat, ironically.
The one that I picked up in Miami. Just give me time until I'm back in the States to process this. But yeah.
We'll talk about it more.
Final thoughts so we can end this podcast on a happy note. I'm always grateful for Graham and Steven for letting me come on board and do this trip to Le Mans. I was sick through a lot of it. I had a terrifying ordeal where I left my passport behind at Le Mans and didn't have it in Paris and pushed back all my Japan plans 24 hours. Like, it was absolutely terrifying. But despite all that, I'm just grateful that I got to see another race that feels like we'll be telling future generations just about how good this is. When people say that Hypercar is in a golden age, the top class endurance racing is in a golden age. This is not just marketing. This is not just like guerrilla marketing. This is real. And we don't know how long this era is going to last. Hopefully it goes a lot longer than some other golden ages of endurance sports car racing. So please enjoy it while you can, because like, this is so cool that I get to witness this, that we all get to like see this out. I just feel so bad that all of my picks just got absolutely hammered. but despite all that, this is good shit.
It's funny, between me and Cam, we actually predicted the whole field. I got the Hypercar winner, and Cam got LMGT3 and LMP2, funnily enough. It's funny how these things turn out.
Wait a minute.
Look, from a more fan standpoint, I really enjoyed this race. I don't claim to be the sports car guy here. Everybody who knows me knows
You're the late convert. I think that's cool that you, of all people, got back-to-back predictions of the overall winner. Whereas me, like the person who is ostensibly paid to cover this sport full time, just like completely bozoed it. Like, that's cool.
It is cool. And look, I've very much enjoyed it. I've actually gone out of my way to watch other WEC races since last year's Le Mans because I've enjoyed the action. I've enjoyed the storytelling. I've enjoyed the action, the depth of quality in the field. The race in itself has been fun and enjoyable, and yeah, like, I don't claim to be a hugely knowledgeable sports car fan, but if there's one thing that I have picked up on from my time with you, with King, with Cam, and the time we've been hosting Motorsport 101, is that sports cars was not in the best of places until this hypercar era came along. It was the inside joke we made on this show many a time that sports cars was in the gutter, and this hypercar category felt like a roll of the dice to try and save it more than anything else, and it's turned out beautifully. I think the first 2-3 hours of this race was everything that everybody was hoping for with this hypercar category. We had 8 different manufacturers on track fighting each other for position at the same time, doing 210 miles an hour down the Mulsanne, and not knowing who the quickest car was. Everybody being competitive. I think the BOP was largely pretty good for the most part. There was multiple manufacturers in contention for large portions of this race. The vision is being fulfilled. We can see it with our own eyes now. We could see the quality of sports car racing pick back up again from where it was, and it's been a joy to watch. As you said earlier, RJ, I'm not sure whether I like this race better or worse than last year. I don't care. They were great for different reasons. Last year, you had the emotional return of Ferrari. This year, you had the vindication of Ferrari. You had a topsy-turvy race. The weather played a huge role in this one. It was a game of attrition and survival, even more than most Le Mans did for that very reason. And we got one of the most incredible finishes to a Le Mans we've ever seen. People talk about 2011 in folklore, with that being the infamous, I think it was 13-second win back then. We just had another one here. If it wasn't for the spin, what on earth would this finish have looked like? It would have been a photo finish after 24 hours of racing. It would have been incredible. The LMP2s didn't get enough airtime, in my opinion, because some of the fighting there between Cool Racing and shout out to your man, Tomo Miata, and into Europol, up there with United Autosport was fantastic to watch. We just didn't get enough of it, really, because of the TV direction. And the Dames in LMGT3 and just, big names. Valentino Rossi was a massive pull for this race. He was being mobbed in autograph sessions. These are all good things for the sport, and the sport is in a great place, and I very much enjoyed it all. And I look forward to the next one.
I do too. With good health and opportunity, I'll be back. Dre, you should come next year.
I really should try.
You don't have to commit to it just yet, but it'd be cool if you did.
I really should try and do this because it's the one race that everybody wants to go to. Unfortunately, someone's got to make their podcasts back here. So I can only try.
Are we the bad guys?
Are we the cursed network? But indeed, but it is what it is. No, a great time. Le Mans is on the bucket list. It is something that I absolutely will experience in person one day and freeze my nipples off in a French field somewhere. But it is something that I will absolutely take up at some point.
Or you could just chill in this hot, stuffy, outdated press room with a bunch of French journos who don't shower, or worse, a bunch of English journos.
And on that note, we'll see you next week. F1's got a triple header coming up over the next 3 weeks. It's a Spanish Grand Prix this weekend, followed by Austria the week after, and the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Tickets still available for one kidney or mortgage payment in 2 weeks' time. Apparently, it's all Red Bull's fault, depending on who you ask. But the triple header is coming up. Still another couple of weeks before we get some bike racing again. IndyCar back this weekend as well. The Grand Prix of Monterey at Laguna Seca. Always a fun round for IndyCar, so that should be a good one alongside Formula One Inspector. 2 more episodes next week, hopefully with a full set of hosts as well. But until next time, I've been Dre Harrison. He's been RJ O'Connell. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you guys next time. Sayonara.
Later, y'all. So the Euros are on, and you mean to tell me that England is in every match and nobody likes the way that they're getting there?
Well, the more things change, RJ, the more they stay the same.
Yeah, that sounds about right.